Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your Excellencies, heads of delegations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. At the outset, allow me on behalf of my delegation to express our gratitude to the government and the people of Mexico for hosting us, and to the United Nations Institute for Disaster Reduction for organizing this event. Again, allow me to convey to you the apologies of His Excellency, the Right Honorable Dr. Msisidi, Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Lesotho, who had wished to be here, but because Lesotho is going for a general election in the next 2 weeks, he couldn't be here. But otherwise, he has sent his best wishes for the success of this event. The onslaught of relentless extreme weather events and stressors continue unabated on our communities and on their fragile livelihoods, even 2 years after the development of and reaching of a consensus on the Ntai framework for disaster risk reduction for the period in 2015. In this case, the point that we can make is the devastating El Niño-induced drought, which wreaked havoc on thousands of our people in Southern Africa during the period 2015-16. My country, Lesotho, has not been spared of the consequences of this catastrophe. More than half our population has been rendered highly vulnerable and in need of humanitarian assistance. This scenario does not exclude several small devastating shocks and stressors that occur annually, thus rendering an increasing number of our people vulnerable and ultimately pushing them into poverty trap. Mr. Chairman, based on our self-introspection as Lesotho, we have come to the conclusion that livelihoods and the local population's levels of resilience are at the center of the whole scenario that keeps repeating itself over and over again. It is against this background that Lesotho has concluded that the most effective way of dealing with this situation is to target resilience and preparedness. Lesotho is currently developing its resilience framework, which is expected to provide guidance to the development and strengthening of communities' livelihoods in order to make them more resilient to future shocks and stressors. This strategy will be complemented through the implementation of community-based early warning and information management systems, which is expected to provide information to communities on preparedness measures against the shocks and stressors. In addition, my government is currently engaged in reviewing the National Strategic Development Plan, in which the resilience framework will be mainstreamed, integrating disaster risk reduction within the school's curriculum, assisting communities to conduct community-owned vulnerability and capacity analysis to facilitate resilience building programs and on developing infrastructure, standards and codes. Mr. President, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, having said all this, Lesotho continues to be highly vulnerable to climate shocks and stressors. And we learn from the news and other mass media that, and as we have learned, Lesotho continues not to be an exception to these issues. It must be indicated that while we have a new and improved framework, we still have to double our efforts to assist our communities in creating and strengthening sustainable livelihoods that can withstand ever-increasing extreme weather shocks and stressors. To achieve and maintain the required sustainability, governments have to take a lead to make deliberate efforts to allocate financial resources to the disaster risk reduction programs and to provide strong coordination arrangements to all relevant stakeholders to channel resources to DRR in order to make noticeable impact on the levels of vulnerability. Our governments also have a huge responsibility to provide good governance for DRR initiatives in order to enable smooth implementation of the same DRR initiatives and an accountability at all levels. In conclusion, I would like to urge our cooperating partners to continue to assist us both technically and financially to achieve higher levels of resilience, which would in turn reduce the level of poverty, which usually creates a vicious cycle of vulnerability. Meetings such as this one should sensitize us all and to provide an insight into how our counterparts are tackling the common challenges facing our people within the disaster risk reduction sector. It is therefore important to establish mechanisms which facilitate continuous learning, exchanges of experiences and good practices from our counterparts so that we can continue to improve and strengthen our community's resilience to climate-induced shocks and stressors. Señor Presidente, muchas gracias.